Thank you for coming and welcome to our Frontline in Focus session. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet today. In my case, it's the Moonina people. And as an Aboriginal man advised me not so long ago, one way to pay respect and acknowledge country is to talk about a place that's special to you. And I had the joy of going down to a place called Mickey's Bay, which is on southern Bruni, and it was the most magical place I have ever seen. It's just gorgeous. So that's definitely a special place in country that I really love. So yeah, it was lovely. I'd also like to say thank you to Sue and the team from Tana for making the time today to come and talk to us. We have had a lot of interest, particularly in this topic. In fact, we've had more people express their interest in this topic through participating in this particular meeting than we've had to any other Frontline in Focus. So it speaks to the interest around trauma and trauma-informed care and how that impacts people who use alcohol and other drugs in our client groups. I'm really excited to be able to have Sue and the team here presenting today. What I would like to do, and I won't take up too much of your time because I know that we've already eaten 8 minutes in, is that I'd just like to say that at the end of this, there will be a survey for you to fill in. It is very, very quickly. And one of the questions on that survey is around what you'd like to talk about at the next Frontline in Focus. So if you can keep that in mind, that'd be really good. And remember that the objective of this really short, sharp training is to provide really quick, useful pieces of information or cold-face ready skills that you can employ in your practice at the end of this meeting. So some really useful things to take away in your daily work. That's enough yabbering from me. Without further ado, I'd like to say thank you to Sue and welcome.
Thank you. I'll just go from the beginning here. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kathy, for all of the background work that goes into organising anything, no matter how small in time. So I really appreciate your support, and thank you to everybody who's here giving up their time to share in Tana's message. My co-presenter, Bridget, is having technical difficulty and isn't on yet, and we've definitely planned a double act, so bear with us while we problem solve on that one. I acknowledge country as well. We often meet as an organisation via Zoom and in person, so we've got just sort of a combination group. So our acknowledgement of country is more generic and not related so much to one specific place, but recognising the traditional custodians of country throughout the whole of Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past, present and future emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I just want to, before we even move into Tana's mission, I just wanted to give you an introduction to myself and Bridget. We're professional educators. We come from an extensive experience. We came together with the express purpose of figuring out what we could do to contribute to solving the problems and challenges that we were experiencing as frontline workers. We are both acutely aware of the amount of pressure that comes in on frontline workers and the expectations for solving all kinds of complex problems, it seems sometimes. That's been our experience. So we feel like we understand where some of you might be at in terms of feeling some pressure. For 4 years, Tana has been on a mission to work out how best to manage real change in our community. And we've come to the understanding that making complex trauma common knowledge is the way to go about it, and from the grassroots level. So we're really working at shifting the culture so that policies, programs and practices do understand and utilise this latest brain science we have on what causes distress in people and the science of human thriving, what we can do to prevent complex trauma. So we're really about which is, from our perspective, this is part of a broader health promotion awareness raising campaign. We want to move people from shame, stigma, from blame, judgment, punishment, and we'll talk about unconscious bias here today. We're moving into insight, having insight, more people having understanding. That leads to nurturing, it leads to healing, kindness and compassion at the population level. So we see this as vital understanding for all adults, because it's with the public health approach that the demand for change is created and is heard by our policymakers. So we do expect that there'd be many people here that have heard of the ACEs study. The original ACEs study was conducted in 1997 by Ander and Folletti, but it took about 20 years to really take hold. So for those who don't, it's a quick review. There were 10 questions that were asked of a Caucasian, mainly white Caucasian middle class group of people, 17,334, I believe. It was quite an extensive sample. The questions included 5 types of child abuse or neglect: physical abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, sexual abuse, and 5 types of household dysfunction: parent with mental illness, divorce, incarceration, substance abuse, or mother treated violently, that occurred before the age of 18. And at the end, participants got a score between 0 and 10, and then they compared the scores to these members' medical records. And in every category except incarceration, at least 10% of the population experienced adversity. So the acute and profound moment of realisation with this study was that it's most people. 64% out of that study had at least one ACE, and many people had 4 or more. And it's when there's 4 or more yes responses to these questions is an ACE score, that the evidence of predictable life adversity is present. So the original investigators developed this pyramid to explain the relationship between ACEs and the rates of disease and disability associated with the higher score. When children and families do not have public policies and community supports to prevent the high ACE scores, we see higher ACEs in subsequent generations, which leads to disrupted brain development in those members of our community through a lack of serve and return interactions. And we'll share the explanation of that in a moment. Science has shown higher ACE scores compromise social, emotional and cognitive development. So it's the ability to function in society at its fundamental level in its early stages of how we develop that. Additionally, toxic stress compromises the immune system and can lead to inflammation in the body, so it creates physical disease. When communities do not provide safe, stable and nurturing relationships to support strong brain architecture and buffer the constant stress that children and adolescents with high ACE scores experience, they adopt health risk behaviours to cope with the stress. And if anybody's studied Gabor Mate's work, he talks about addiction as a solution to a problem. He doesn't see it as a disease, but a solution to a problem. Examples include, substance use, smoking, early promiscuity, overeating, could be all sorts of, take all sorts of forms that we see and are recognised as our health burden today. It makes sense that disease, disability and social problems logically follow the adoption of these unhealthy coping skills. Even when unhealthy coping skills are not adopted, interestingly, exposure to toxic levels of stress disrupt multiple physiological systems, including the immune system, that can lead to the development of disease. So the studies have shown that even in people that don't turn to addiction, high ACEs still lead to negative health outcomes. Toxic stress impacts genetic expression across the lifespan. So it's not just what happens in childhood. it's actually expressed in adulthood much later. It sort of emerges over time. And so that's represented by the arrow on the left side of the pyramid. The most astounding thing about the ACE study is that it showed when you have 4 or more ACEs, people tend to die 5 to 10 years earlier than those who have low or no ACEs. And a subsequent, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know that Bridget has arrived.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. She'll be on the next slide. So yeah, this is interesting. A subsequent study done by the National Institute of Health found that when you have 6 or more ACEs, your life is cut short by 20 years on average. Now, some of you may have looked at the ACEs studies. There's been a lot of other work since. There's been variations, there's been inclusions about race, but this original study was pivotal because it really was it was actually not a diverse, it was people who could buy their private health insurance in America. So it wasn't, it didn't even include the most disadvantaged people. So that this is what makes the data even more profound. On the right side, you see the intergenerational transmission. So we know that if parents with high ACE scores have children, they have a much higher likelihood of passing on ACEs. And as you saw, if you watched that beautiful little animation from Wales, that can be disrupted by, in a positive way, by people in the community being ACE aware. And so that's the intention that we have here. Bridget, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much for your patience with my technical issues. There was quite significant technical issues, and this is the third device that's finally worked. So my apologies, and I'm so happy to be here. Just to get into it, this is from Dr. Robert Anda, who was from the original. He was the original doctor with Dr. Vince Folletti, his work really uncovered the causal link between adverse childhood experiences and profound health impacts. And you can see from this slide that it's a summary of how ACEs impact right across the board and cause. The important word is there's a causation link there between, there's now proven in science that there's a causation link between what we experience, especially in our early years, and actually that is a cause and effect relationship between these problems. So looking at those problems, affect regulation, panic reactions, depression, anxiety, that we can all now work with people on affect regulation. You know, that's not something that has to be in a clinical relationship, but that can be something that we can discuss openly. We talk about regulation, we talk about the importance of regulation, we talk about how our dial is switched up, so we're more heightened, so we need to be mindful of that regulation. Moving on then, the co-occurring problems with somatic issues and body pain. So those experiences that cause that threat response system to switch on and stay switched on really affect the body in so many different ways. And we can predict. So we can predict that these things will happen from pretty much from 4 or more ACEs is when those ACEs really start having a profound impact on people. And we can see there that it affects the body, hallucinations, sleep disturbances, obesity, pain, sexual dissatisfaction, uncomfortable in your own body. So Bessel van der Kolk, the amazing psychiatrist who's a leader in his field with post-traumatic stress disorder, he talks about you must have a friendly relationship with your own body. And I think that that's a very profound thing, that adverse childhood experiences causes us to not have a friendly, comfortable relationship with our own body, and even to the point of disassociation where we're cut off from our body. It becomes too painful. And so there's a lot of body issues there that come forward from having these experiences. And there we have the substance use, that self-medication. There's research about children that have gone through childhood feeling really stressed, feeling really tense, feeling their threat response system firing all the time. and then suddenly being exposed, around the age of 10 to 12, starting to experiment with drugs and alcohol, and finding it that for the first time in their life, they feel relaxed. They feel they feel they can switch off, and their default state is highly vigilant and stressed from their experiences. They don't know any other default state until they start using, until they've experienced a substance. And the research is that a lot of people who will experiment will never really need to go back, because it wasn't that much of a difference between their default state and the state intoxicated. But for other people who've had ACEs, it can be a self-medication pathway with lots of unfortunate side effects, as we all know. Yeah. So Dr. Robert Anda is a really a key researcher in this area, and he talks about the pipeline, the school to prison pipeline, and ACEs are a major pathway to opioid use, substance misuse, mental and emotional health challenges. So it increases the use of street drugs. What Dr. Robert Anda really makes very, very clear is that there is a dose-response relationship. So the more ACEs that people have been exposed to, that increases, there's a direct proportional relationship to the probability that they will become addicted. So that's been proven now, and it's very, very clear that these ACEs cause people to be probably more likely to be addicted. So there's an increase. 4 or more ACEs is the key cutoff point, is the key watershed point, where after that, that really starts having that profound impact. There's a greater risk of alcoholism. So that's what I mean, a strong graded relationship. And 50% of women in a substance use program had been incest survivors. So the original ACEs study was, I'm not sure if you all know the background to it, but we had Vince Folletti had a really successful weight loss program. And then he found that participants were actually putting on the weight rapidly, or even gaining more than they had been. And he interviewed them, and he found that it was used as a strategy for self-protection. And a lot of the participants had been incest victims, unfortunately, or victims of violence, and they wanted to be overweight is unseen, is what one woman was quoted as saying. So we're looking at the effect. We're looking at the cause is ACEs, and the effect then is the alcoholism, the obesity, the drug use, and it's a physical effect. Yeah. And now this is an infograph that's produced to show that the proportion of social problems that are contributed or attributed to ACEs, and you can see from that just a quick glance at it, the very high percentage of chronic alcoholism, 41%. We've got you can read it there yourself, but you can see that it's drinking causing problems right up to 61%. So really, Tana's message is that by addressing ACEs and by being able to talk about it openly, we make that common knowledge, therefore people can relate back to the root cause, and we can say that ACEs will continue to happen, but then we have this common understanding, common knowledge, and an understanding of the importance of prevention through behavior, positive experiences, and the resilience. So that's why this is really important, to attribute the proportion of the problems to ACEs.
And this is also seen as an oil slick, that if you could imagine putting paper towel over this oil slick and soaking up. Do you want to speak to that, Bridget? If we could soak up
yeah, exactly what you said. That's what Dr. Robert Anda talks about, that you put your paper towel onto it, and imagine that we could soak up all that black oil slick, and look at the proportion of problems that we would be able to mitigate. Thanks, Sue. Now this is a really great infographic to show you that the problems that we're facing aren't just of the individual. So it's not just a problem of someone who needs to pull himself up by his bootstraps, or it's not enough self-control or not enough free will. The context is more and more, we are discovering that it's the context that people are finding themselves in that are have a profound impact on the problems that they have to deal with. So you've got your adverse childhood experiences that we can see, and how they lead to a myriad of problems there. But underneath that, there's also a growing movement to address community contexts and community environment. And that's where we come in with policy pressure on policymakers to really put money into these community contexts to improve them. We know what works, we know what helps people thrive, but we need to make that front and center in policy. Yeah. Did you want to talk to that? Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah. So so the idea, just to sort of reiterate and keep you with us, there's the initial understanding, and probably where we're emerging out of now globally, in our awareness as humanity, is from that individual focus into understanding the importance of community. We do focus a lot on the individual. And so as we were problem solving and figuring out what we might be able to do to contribute to solving this problem, we had to understand the root cause, and we recognise that the root cause of so many problems is complex trauma, is adverse experiences that are unresolved. And that, so therefore the awareness that mental health is constructed socially. So the solution has to be a social solution. And Dr. Robert Ander, we have information from a lot of people, but he features in this presentation because his work is so good. Somebody put this image together based on the way he spoke about it. Because we know now that 70% of the population, in any given population, has at least one ACE, the population affected by ACEs are like the driving wheel of society. And when the driving wheel of society is so affected with their own, grappling with so many different elements of life that are made harder by unresolved ACEs, then the pressure is put on the system. So anybody who works in the education system or has been involved in a healthcare system, child and family services, the justice system, frontline workers, those systems, the cogs are the population is sluggish and slow and not operating fluidly because we have this situation. So the cogs are being worn down on the gears in our society. And we came to realise that without community understanding, without population level understanding and awareness, we won't get those systems moving fluidly. But with widespread trauma awareness at the population level, that causes those wheels to start turning more fluidly, move faster and become more efficient.
Can I just add that,
yeah,
Sue, that the growing movement of ACEs is being pretty much led at a grassroots level by people with high ACEs. So it's a movement of empowerment by people who really get it. All over the world, people are emerging who find this information so liberating that they go from really being dragged down by their own ACEs to dealing with them, to actually bringing it forward and really understanding how important this is for everybody to know.
Yeah, we have an awareness that the people who have suffered the most, when they heal, have the greatest contribution to make because of it's the law of polarity. They have one extreme to the other, and it's amazing to see how many people, once they realize, oh my gosh, it's not me, it's my trauma. I didn't know I was traumatized, is what some people say. They get insight into this and they just want to devour more and more information. And the first thing that they want to do is change it for their kids. one story that was shared from a guy that was in prison, when he realised it was his ACEs, that he had complex trauma. The first thing he wanted to do was phone his children, and he'd never talked about it before, but he said to his 15-year-old, "How do you feel about me being in prison?" And she said, "I'm angry about it." Apparently there were a lot more expletives, but she said, "I'm really angry about it. I hate it," and he's, wow, like hadn't even been able to get out of his own place, within himself to see, to look outward. So it does make people more community minded once they realise, once they can get out of self-blame and deep shame.
Yeah.
So Bridget, maybe you want to speak to this.
So the self-healing communities model was in Washington State, and it was again a movement of people coming together and the community solving their own problem using the data, and it was really, really successful. We had births to teen mothers went down 62%, infant mortality went down, youth suicide, so suicide attempts by people under the age of 18 went down by 98%. So it was profound. All this data was supported independently by Washington State University. Youth arrests for violent crimes dropped 53%. The high school dropout rate decreased by almost half, and the self-healing communities model has seen these results duplicated. So it's a powerful model that's been proven to work, but it does take community awareness of the impact of ACEs on the individual and on the community, and it takes a willingness to speak about ACEs, which is a difficult topic to talk about. So Foucault, the French philosopher who studies the link between power and knowledge, he talks about the greatest knowledge lies in the capacity to shape the way reality is talked about. And that's Tana's message, that we need to really have a coordinated approach to the language that we're using and the concepts that we're sharing, so that the reality is talked about in a way that's we're all on the same page, we're all thinking the same thing, and we all have a deep common understanding of the causes of these problems. So secrecy, ignorance. Oh, sorry, Sue, you go.
That's all right. Well, just recognising and acknowledging that one of the things that we've really grappled with ourselves, especially in the beginning, when we decided to have a big forum in 2019, we had 200 people in Ulverston, and it was a great diverse cross-section of society. All of the systems were represented, and a lot of work's been done in Tassie since then. But it was a real sense of, how do we talk about this? It is actually really common, but it is difficult to talk about. But if we don't talk about it, it happens in secrecy. If we don't talk about it, people are ignorant of it, and it does continue to happen. It's anything that's hidden, and it's sort of, bringing the elephant out of the corner, shining a light on the problem, not sweeping the problem under the carpet. We really came to that's the place that we have to be, especially recognising that it is the root cause of all of our major physical and mental ill health. So Tana recognises that the solution is beyond service provision alone. We've had that reaffirmed by psychiatrists, psychologists, social service workers, that there is never going to be enough treatment, and because it's just too many people. So the cogs, like we saw on that illustration, are being worn down. Why is it difficult to talk about? Because everybody has unconscious biases, and if they're unconscious, it means we're unaware of them. So that's where the work is. And there's a wonderful woman, Joan Galeese, who's the National Centre for Trauma Informed Care for SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration in America. They're very up with ACEs. They really launched the sort of popular movement utilising the ACE study in about 2014. So she acknowledges there are social taboos, and social taboos exist because of some of the, because we're talking about really what happens in people's homes. And so that is uncomfortable, but and so there's this deep shame that is in people, but we really do understand that the intergenerational transmission means that there is no one to blame, and that this is so much bigger than any one person. It's a societal issue. The prey, you know, the prey become the predator because they don't know any better, because the society at large hasn't got the awareness. So we don't blame anyone. There's no place for that here. That doesn't resolve shame. But like we said, if over 3/4 of the population are exposed to ACEs, then we are all daily interacting with people who are exposed to or dealing with the consequences of toxic stress. And so, again, it all points to this has to be widespread knowledge. And there's a great system of moving from trauma awareness enables trauma sensitivity, or it inspires trauma sensitivity. So as soon as we're aware, then we start to become more sensitive to people's big reactions and over-the-top reactions, and we just become more sensitive and stop and think, I wonder what's behind all of this. And then trauma sensitivity leads to trauma responsiveness within organisations, families, friendship groups, wherever we are. The sensitivity leads to a different response. And it's when those new responses to a traumatised person and a traumatised behaviour become the new normal, that's when we're a trauma-informed society. I really like that. That came from the Johnson City model.
Just your 10-minute ringing a bell here, folks.
10 minutes. Thank you. So we'll need to go a little bit faster. In terms of unconscious biases, a group of doctors, neuroscientists, and communication specialists got together, and they analysed the everyday guy in the street, girl in the street. What are their subconscious biases towards development? And what they found is that 90% of the people interviewed in supermarkets and shopping centres had not thought about what causes child development to be successful or otherwise, and really had no clue. Their subconscious biases were what they called them swamp creatures. They said these swamp creatures are eating up your message. So why should I care? The individual doesn't care. They're self-focused. How does it work? I don't know. I never really thought about child development. Maybe it just, you toughen them up and they turn out well. The self-made child. What disrupts development? Well, not being strict enough, or being too strict, or spoiling them, or not having being born bad. There was so many of these potential swamp creatures that were eating the messages. And what can be done? Well, too bad, too bad, too sad. They're damaged now. What can we do? But what the Centre for the Developing Child and Frameworks and the Alberta Family Wellbeing Initiative put together was what we can change, biases we can swap in, and they're the metaphors. So they took these metaphors that they can use. To help people understand what we need them to know in order to understand about human development. So very quickly, this is in an average group of 30 people. 6 have no ACEs, 5 have 1, 6 have 2, and 3 have 3, and 7 have 4 or 5, and 3 have 6 or more. So 10 people, a third of a group, have ACEs enough to affect them severely. So while society is designed to ideally work optimally with people with no ACEs, we know that a third of the population have ACEs that's really impacting and damaging them. Thanks, Sue. So we move on.
So knowing just when a person who's affected knows about the science of complex trauma, it literally changes their beliefs. And PACES Connection have identified that, these just little examples. Oh, I wasn't born bad. I wasn't responsible for the things that happened to me. I coped appropriately with what I had. It kept me alive, and I can change. That's the most empowering and powerful things. So how do we talk about adverse life experiences? How do we talk about it? The way that we get around these subconscious biases is to use the empirically tested metaphors. First of all, we have to understand ACEs, which we've covered. We've got brain architecture, toxic stress, serve and return interactions, air traffic control and resilience. This is a self-awareness journey. No one can really do it for anyone else, but we can all do it out for ourselves and then support one another. And one of those ways is to give language. That's what we want as your takeaway today, that you take this language and you use it with those affected by ACEs. So the first metaphor is brain architecture. And it's the, when you think about building a home, the first thing we need to do is spend a lot of time on the invisible almost, on the groundwork. And the first thing we need to do is lay that foundation and those pillars so that they're strong. And just like building a home in the early years of life, the growing brain is developing its architecture that is used for building on for the rest of its life. So when we build that architecture in young people, the environment is what helps build that architecture. We're all born with the capacity to learn just about anything, but a pruning happens of the neural pathways based on the repeated experiences that we have. So as we have our name repeated to us, we get to learn our name. For people who live in a household that's full of toxic stress and threat, they're the repeated experiences, and pathways are built for those experiences, to manage those experiences. So getting it right the first time is so much easier than trying to fix it once the architecture has been built.
So the importance of serve and return interactions, and the importance of people understanding that these serve and return interactions literally build those reward systems in the brain that strengthen our brain so we can have strong serotonin, GABA, dopamine pathways, and they are built from serve and return. And there's a fragility for those of us who haven't had the serve and return, and that will give us a propensity for looking for those neurochemical highs from substance abuse. So serve and return is something that needs to be there in place. Just very briefly, I know we're running out of time, but just very briefly, analyzing psychologists who were the most successful psychologists in Sweden, they found that it was regardless of what method they used, it was their ability to have re-establish that attachment, secure solid attachment through serve and return, that helped people heal from their trauma. So the serve and return is huge, and it can be built later on from a therapeutic relationship, but ideally it's that parental baby bond, but it can be secured later on as well. Yep.
Yeah.
We'll go through all the metaphors, Sue.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we can't talk for too long. But air traffic control is another metaphor that's very commonly understood by the population. They tested lots of different ones, and what they found was that the idea of air traffic control, of being able to have that affect regulation of the cortex coming in and being able to control them, that can be built up, and that metaphor is a really strong metaphor to use when we talk about losing it and not losing it. Toxic stress is another metaphor that was that was found to really, people got it, people really understood it. The impact of slightly positive stress experiences that cause a little bit of stress, but you go back to baseline. Tolerable stressful experiences that with support we again can go back to baseline, takes a little bit longer. And the concept of toxic stress, where we are subconsciously or consciously stuck in that threat response system, and that amygdala is switched on constantly. And unfortunately, that is the impact of ACEs. That we don't know any different when we have ACEs in childhood. We don't realize that everyone else isn't functioning in this toxic way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that baseline stays high, and that's that hypervigilance. So there's a sense of I'm never safe, so I'm always on the lookout to threaten. That impacts the ability to cognitively work, in that front part of the brain. Just going back to this one, I did want to point out, in case any of you are working with younger adults, that the adolescent, the opportunity for that brain architecture, it goes on for social emotional development, particularly way up to the age of 25 is what they say now. So that serve and return relationships, that always responding to the individual, but giving, that giving and receiving like a tennis match, there's an opportunity for the architecture to be dealt with and mitigated at a very strong level, if for anybody who's working with clients who are still in that brain development stage.
Epigenetics, I know we're running out of time, but epigenetics, it's very briefly, it's a scientific experiment using rodents and giving them the smell of cherry blossom and at the same time an electric shock, and then breeding the male rodents, and then not only that F1 generation, but into the second generation, the F2 generation. And what they found was when those F2 generation were exposed to the smell of cherry blossom, they had a very pronounced stress response. So what we're seeing is that in mammals, there is an epigenetic response down through the generations, a heightened stress response that can be switched on or switched off. It's not the genes themselves that have changed, but it's the expression of the genes that's changed. And positive interactions can switch off those epigenetic changes for the better. So that's a profound finding in science.
Yeah, so that also points to the fact that it's not just what happens to a person necessarily. Sometimes they're carrying the effects of what happened to their parents or grandparents into their life journey. So that's where some of the mysteries lie, and that's where we really can't go into any blame. This reiterates that air traffic control system is the executive function. It's the prefrontal cortex, the ability to take in lots of stimuli from the environment and integrate it, understand it, make sense of it, make plans, make decisions, and cope with all of the things that life throws at us. That's impacted. And it's a good metaphor that really works, the air traffic control system. And again, just reiterating that improving this helps with, through serve and return interactions, helps with all of these things, focusing, problem solving, planning, managing behaviour and emotional states, adjusting to new circumstances. So the power of serve and return cannot be underestimated. The power of any human interaction that's positive, especially for people who have suffered, is what builds resilience.
Another metaphor that's found to be very successful with developing understanding and decreasing subconscious bias is the focus on resilience and moving that fulcrum across so that the negative experiences don't have such a profound impact, and so that these positive experiences do. So there's a great focus on understanding of that seesaw and the ability to move the fulcrum with our input and with our support, that we can help people function more successfully and be more resilient. Yeah, that was found that people could get that. They could really click with the idea of move the fulcrum, and that way it's not the negative aren't so powerful. Yeah.
So positive childhood experiences are what offset. So even if people have a lot of negative experiences, it can often be explained, well, this happened to me, but I was okay. There's always, maybe the second last dot point, there's somebody, at least one adult, who takes an interest in you. But, being able to talk about your feelings with someone, family who stands by you, participating in community traditions in some way, sense of belonging, supported by friends, safe and protected. These are all positive experiences that, although this has come from studies on childhood experiences, we can use all of these dot points, these activities with anybody that we interact with to promote well-being.
Can I say, Sue, as well, that what's important is that scientists, PhDs, people doing doctorates have actually shown that these experiences have a positive impact. So it's intuitively we know this, but now we can show in our research, we can get some research and we say, look, this has been shown to reduce the impact of ACEs. This is what works. It's really good, solid research behind your funding applications. Yeah.
Yeah. So takeaways, key messages is really we want you to go away understanding that our experiences and our expectations literally build our physiology. It's not just, you know, get over it. It really is building our physiology, and that's what we have to change, and that's why it takes time. Reframing issues when we talk about the issues that we're dealing with in our systems here, that we reframe those around the construct of ACEs. There's so much science out there now from the ACEs work. We're using these metaphors consistently. We believe that that alone will eliminate those swamp creatures, those unconscious biases that make people not hear the message that we're trying to get. And we recommend that you go away using the metaphors of brain architecture, toxic stress, resilience, air traffic control, serve and return with your clients. Use those metaphors when you're pitching for funding. Use those metaphors with everyone everywhere, because when we spread the science, we spread the compassion. We're investing in what works, and we understand that root causes of a problem need a grassroots solution. So where to from here? If you agree with, you know, what we're trying to do and you want to make it stronger and work, we really have to stand together. That's why we're a network. So if you'd like to add your support to Tanner, it's a simple process, free, to go to the website and just click on the button that says become a supporter, because it's the number of people who are giving these messages to our policymakers that will create those policies, bring them into form. We have a community of care meeting, the first one for Tasmania coming up on Tuesday evening and Wednesday daytime in Devonport live or on Zoom. If you would like to become part of that community, we're going to be running those 3 times a year, so just get in touch with those with us about those if you'd like to join. And if you're in the Burnie regional area, we have a forum coming up with some workshops attached to it for deeper understanding and implementation of these ideas, beginning on the 22nd of March. Also, we'd encourage you to book Tanner Talks in your organisation so we can get this across to everybody. It's really about getting the message to everybody, the cleaners, the auxiliary staff, whoever it is that's involved with people in your organisation. The more we know, the better we do. Thank you.